The Naval Air Station was already awake before the sun came up. The ocean breeze carried the smell of salt and fuel across the wide stretch of concrete runways. Helicopters stood in neat lines, and gray ships rested in the harbor beyond the fence. Inside one of the main briefing buildings, officers in press uniforms moved with purpose. Today was not an ordinary day. A large joint training exercise was about to begin, bringing together special warfare teams and fleet command for a high-level operation. Inside the building, screens glowed with maps and moving symbols. Voices echoed down hallways. The atmosphere felt tight, like the air before a storm. Among the crowd stood a man most people barely noticed. He wasn't the tallest in the room. He didn't speak loudly. His uniform was clean but simple, without rows of flashy decorations. On paper, he was a communications specialist assigned to support a SEAL unit during the exercise. To many, that meant he worked behind screens, while others took the spotlight. But next to his name on the assignment roster was a call sign, Iron Ghost. Some of the younger officers whispered about it when they saw it printed on the digital board. Iron Ghost? Sound dramatic. Who even comes up with that? He heard them. He always did. But he never reacted. At exactly 0700, the doors to the main briefing room opened, and everyone stood a little straighter. The newly appointed SEAL Admiral entered with steady steps. She carried herself with sharp confidence, the kind built over decades of service. She had earned her position through discipline and results, and everyone in the region knew it. She was the first woman to command that special warfare group, and she carried that responsibility with visible strength. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, taking in faces, posture, small details. The briefing began without delay. Satellite images flashed across the screen. The exercise would simulate a maritime security threat involving multiple vessels, air support, and coordinated response from different units. Timing and communication would be critical. When the operations officer read out the team assignments over microphone, he paused slightly at one line. Tactical comms lead, called Sign Iron Ghost. A few soft chuckles moved through the room. The Admiral raised one eyebrow. Iron Ghost, she repeated, her tone calm but edged with mild amusement. That's quite a name. More polite laughter followed. She wasn't trying to be cruel. In her world, call signs were part of the culture. Some were funny. Some were ironic. Some were harsh reminders of past mistakes. But this one sounded like something out of a late-night action movie. Let's hope the ghost part doesn't mean disappearing when we need you, she added lightly before turning back to the screen. The room laughed again, louder this time. The man standing near the back didn't move. His face remained steady. He kept his eyes on the screen, hands clasped behind his back. If the comment bothered him, he didn't show it. To him, the call sign wasn't entertainment. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't self-chosen. It was given. The briefing continued for over an hour. Details were assigned. Timelines confirmed. Backup systems reviewed. The Admiral asked sharp questions and expected clear answers. She moved through scenarios quickly, adjusting plans in real time to test her officers. When the meeting ended, people filtered out in groups, still talking about the scale of the exercise. He returned quietly to the communications center, a windowless room filled with monitors, headsets, and secure equipment. This was where he felt most at home, not because it was easy, but because it was focused, clear, logical. He placed his headset on the desk and checked each console personally, even though everything had already been inspected twice. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped aside before answering. "Hey," he said softly. On the other end was a small, cheerful voice asking if he remembered it was school project day. He smiled, and the hard lines of his face softened instantly. "I didn't forget," he said. "I packed in your bag last night. Check the front pocket." A pause. "Oh, found it." He listened as she talked quickly about her presentation and how nervous she felt. He encouraged her the way he always did. Calmly, patiently. "You'll do great," he said. "Just speak slow and look at your teacher." Before hanging up, she asked the same question she always did. "Are you coming home tonight?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I'll be home." After the call ended, he stood still for a moment. Then he put the phone away and returned to his station. Most people on base knew he was a single father. Fewer knew why. Years earlier, life had shifted in a way he never expected. Since then, he had rearranged everything quietly. He had requested assignments that kept him closer to home. He had turned down opportunities that would have taken him far away for long periods. Not because he lacked courage. Not because he lacked skill. Because he had someone waiting at the kitchen table every night. By mid-morning, the first phase of the exercise began. Ships moved out of harbor. Helicopters lifted into the sky. Digital maps filled with moving symbols representing friendly and simulated hostile units. Inside the command center, voices came alive through headsets. He monitored multiple channels at once, tracking signal strength and encryption stability. His hands moved smoothly across the console, adjusting frequencies and verifying secure lines. The Admiral stood at the central command table, watching everything unfold. The first few hours went smoothly. Units communicated clearly. Position updates were precise. The exercise ran like a well-oiled machine. During a brief lull, one of the junior officers near the Admiral glanced at the communications feed and said quietly, "Iron Ghost has stable routing across all sectors." The Admiral nodded. "Good. Let's keep it that way." She still hadn't looked at him directly since the briefing. Around early afternoon, the scenario escalated. Simulated hostile vessels began moving unpredictably on the radar. Drone feeds were introduced to increase complexity. The command center grew louder as overlapping updates filled the air. He noticed a slight flicker in one of the satellite relay channels. Just a flicker. Most would ignore it. He didn't. He adjusted a backup pass silently and logged the fluctuation. His expression never changed. Across the room, the Admiral issued rapid instructions, her voice steady and controlled. She thrived in high-pressure environments. She trusted her teams, but she also pushed them hard. As the simulated threat tightened, one of the communications officers muttered, "Signal interference spike on primary channel." Heads turned. He leaned closer to his monitor, fingers moving quickly. "It's minor," someone said. "Probably part of the simulation." Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. He remembered another time, years ago, when a minor flicker had been the first sign of something much worse. Back then, he had learned that hesitation cost more than embarrassment. He quietly rerouted a secondary channel again, strengthening the signal before the interference could spread. No one noticed. Not yet. The Admiral continued directing the operation, unaware that the steady flow of information she relied on had just been reinforced by the man she had lightly mocked hours earlier. In the communications room, one of the younger technicians glanced at him. "Why'd you switch to backup?" he asked. "Habit," he replied simply. The technician shrugged and returned to his screen. The exercise pushed forward. Ships maneuvered. Helicopters repositioned. The scenario grew more complex by the minute. Late in the afternoon, the Admiral stepped into the communications center for the first time that day. She walked slowly between the rows of equipment, observing the setup. Her presence changed the air in the room. Conversations shortened. Movements became sharper. She stopped behind him. "Your Iron Ghost," she said, not unkindly. "Yes, ma'am." She studied his screen for a moment. "Everything holding?" "Yes, ma'am. Minor interference earlier. Stabilized." She nodded once. "Professional. Neutral. Good. We can't afford gaps." "No, ma'am." For a brief second, her eyes lingered on him, as if measuring something beyond rank and roll. Then she turned and walked out. He released a slow breath once she left, though he hadn't realized he was holding it. The sun began to dip toward the horizon outside, casting long shadows across the base. The exercise would continue into the night phase, where coordination became even more critical. As the sky darkened, the first real sign of trouble began to form on his screen. Signal strength dropped sharply across multiple channels at once. This wasn't part of the planned simulation. Static crept into headsets. Across the command floor, voices overlapped in confusion. He straightened in his chair. The flicker was back. But this time, it wasn't small. And within seconds, the calm rhythm of the entire operation began to shake. The Admiral's voice cut through the noise, demanding clarity. But clarity was fading. Inside the growing chaos, one thing remained steady: his breathing, his hands, and the call sign that very soon no one in that building would ever laugh at again. The night after the exercise, the base was quiet. Lights blinked softly on the radar towers and control panels, reflecting in the dark waters of the harbor. He sat alone in the small kitchen of his modest apartment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. His daughter's laughter from the day still echoed in his mind, even though she had been asleep for hours. He poured a cup of coffee and held it in both hands, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. He thought about the Admiral. She had walked into the communications center today and had looked at him with the briefest flicker of curiosity. That flicker had felt like a challenge, though he knew she would never say it outright. It wasn't about pride. It was about understanding, about seeing who could act when the pressure rose and the noise got louder. She didn't yet know the full story behind Iron Ghost. Most people didn't. The name had a history, one that had nothing to do with titles or ceremony. Years ago, he had been part of a forward-deployed special operations unit during a mission that was meant to be routine. The team had been tasked with monitoring hostile activity in a small coastal region overseas, gathering intelligence to prevent escalation. On paper, it was simple. In reality, it became the kind of nightmare no training could fully prepare someone for. During the mission, the satellite feeds started failing. One by one, the automated systems that relayed location and status updates to headquarters began glitching. The team on the ground lost contact with their extraction point. Enemy patrols were nearby, and the terrain was unstable, rocky cliffs and winding waterways that could trap a person in seconds. Panic could have spread, but he remembered a simple rule. If fear found foothold, even for a moment, it could cost lives. He had dropped to his knees among the cables, sweat running down his face, and manually rerouted the encrypted communications. Every movement was precise. Every command confirmed twice. The others looked to him because, in that moment, he was the voice of safety. Even as a distant gunfire and shouting edged closer, his tone never wavered. Hours passed like minutes. He stayed connected to multiple channels, relaying coordinates, monitoring interference, and keeping the team aligned while they moved silently across dangerous ground. At one point, a misstep sent a teammate slipping toward the water's edge. Without hesitating, he guided them with calm, clear instructions, ensuring no one fell. By the end of the operation, everyone made it back safely. When the team debriefed later, one of the SEALs looked at him and said, "We never saw you move. We only heard you. That's why we called you Iron Ghost." It was a name earned in the shadows, not for recognition, but as a quiet nod to the skill and steadiness he had shown when nothing else could be trusted. He had returned home after that mission, carrying injuries no one outside the team knew about. A broken rib, a deep cut across his shoulder, a few days of bruising and exhaustion. He had requested time at home instead of public acknowledgement. The medal he was recommended for was accepted quietly, without ceremony. There were no pictures in newspapers, no speeches, just a small note in his personnel file, and the understanding of those who had been there with him. Years passed, and his life changed in ways he had never imagined. A child entered his world, and everything else had to adjust. Deployment schedules were renegotiated. Long missions overseas became rare. Every assignment he took was weighed against the promise of being home for her. People sometimes asked why he wasn't climbing the ranks faster. The answer was simple. He had something far more important than medals. He had someone waiting for him. He remembered the first time he realized the weight of that choice. His daughter had been barely a toddler, curious about everything. One day, while he was preparing for a long training deployment, she tugged on his sleeve and asked why he had to go. There was no simple answer. She didn't understand duty. She only understood that her father would be gone. He knelt down and promised her that he would always try to come back, that no mission mattered more than the people who loved him at home. From that day, his decisions were never the same. Even during exercises like the one today, his focus was never just on the operation. He thought about balance, how to excel without losing sight of what was real. That meant working harder, staying calm, anticipating problems before they happened, and preparing contingencies for everything. It was the same approach that had kept lives safe overseas. now applied to both work and home. As he sipped his coffee, he thought about the younger officers he saw in the briefing room. Some laughed at Iron Ghost, thinking it a joke. They didn't know that names could carry history, or that a person who appeared quiet could hold worlds of experience and courage behind that calm expression. Leadership, he had learned, wasn't about making noise. It was about knowing when to speak and when to act. The Admiral had challenged him today, indirectly, by mocking the call sign, not out of malice, but out of expectation. She had seen hundreds of officers, thousands of operations, and had no patience for pretension. In her eyes, Iron Ghost sounded like a storybook figure, not a man whose calm had saved lives. That made him curious. She would learn soon enough. He glanced at the small notebook on the kitchen table. It wasn't fancy, just a thin spiral, but inside were lists, notes, and diagrams he'd been keeping for years. Plans for communication redundancies, schedules, and backup protocols. He had developed methods nobody else could replicate, not because he wanted recognition, but because he knew the cost of failure. One small error in communication could turn a routine operation into a disaster. At that moment, his phone buzzed again. A text from a friend, a fellow officer, read, "Nice work today. Didn't think the Admiral would notice, but she did. You saved the exercise." He smiled faintly. They didn't know everything, and they didn't need to. A nod of acknowledgement was enough. The work itself was its own reward. Later that evening, he walked along the quiet streets near his apartment. The ocean was visible in the distance, moonlight reflecting on the waves. He thought about what it meant to be dependable, to be steady when others faltered. He thought about the days when every decision mattered, when hesitation was not an option. Those lessons were not learned in classrooms or from manuals. They were learned in moments that left permanent marks on the soul. He paused his streetlight, looking at the reflection of himself in a puddle. A man in uniform, quiet, watchful, carrying both the burden of past missions and the responsibility of home. There was strength in that reflection, but also humility. He had learned the hard way that power without purpose was empty. The real measure of a person was how they carried themselves when no one was watching, how they acted when the world depended on them, but the accolades did not exist. Inside, his daughter's laughter had already begun in dreams. Her small presence was the anchor that grounded him. Every mission, every assignment, every call sign carried weight, but nothing compared to being a steady presence in her life. She had no idea of the missions or the dangers. She only knew her father was there, that he listened, that he cared. That night, as he reviewed protocols and checked communications one last time before bed, he reflected on the delicate balance he maintained. The world demanded courage and skill, but home demanded patience and presence. And somehow, through every exercise, every live drill, every challenge that came to the comms, he managed both. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The Admiral would continue to push the unit hard, testing everyone's limits. She would continue to doubt, to challenge, to demand perfection. And he would continue to meet those challenges quietly, without flair, without show. Because that was who he was. That was Iron Ghost. He poured the last sip of his coffee and placed the cup in the sink. The apartment was still, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of waves. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling both the weight and the quiet pride of responsibility. Being a father and professional, a protector at work and at home, had taught him more than any accolade could. Tomorrow, the comms would falter again. The exercise would intensify, and the Admiral would witness what he had already done countless times. But tonight, there was only peace, only the quiet knowledge that he had done what mattered, that he had stayed steady when others faltered, that he had earned his place, earned his call sign, and earned the quiet respect of those who mattered most, even if they didn't yet realize it. He switched off the lights, leaving the notebook on the table. In the darkness, he could still hear her soft breathing in the next room, and it reminded him why every decision, every steady hand, every calm voice mattered. Life didn't wait for perfection. Life didn't care about recognition. But he had learned to live with both discipline and love. And that balance, he knew, would carry him through whatever tomorrow would bring. The next morning, the base was alive with activity before the sun had fully risen. The air smelled of salt and diesel, mixed with a faint metallic scent of equipment being prepared. The joint exercise continued, more complex now, involving multiple ships, helicopters, and the coordination of drone surveillance. Every move had to be precise, and every voice over the comms mattered. He arrived early, as always, checking each station and console methodically. His headset rested around his neck. Ready? The previous day had been a reminder that even minor disruptions could grow into something much larger. Today he would be ready. He always was. The Admiral strode into the communications center, her presence commanding attention without effort. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, assessing the team, noting posture, noting focus. She stopped briefly at the back, where he stood. The flicker of amusement from the previous day had vanished. Today, there was only observation, sharp and deliberate. The exercise began with precise coordination. Vessels moved in formation. Helicopters lifted and hovered at calculated distances. The drones gave an eye in the sky, feeding real-time data into the network. Overhead, the sky was pale and cloudless, giving a sharp clarity to every motion. At first, everything went smoothly. Communication channels hummed with steady updates, status reports, and confirmations. The junior officers and techs followed protocols, monitoring frequencies and checking logs. He moved between consoles, eyes scanning multiple feeds, hands moving quickly but deliberately, ensuring every line was stable. Then it happened. A minor spike in interference appeared on the main channel. The screens blinked for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable. But he noticed. He leaned forward, fingers flying over the keyboard, activating secondary encryption and initiating a fallback relay. The small glitch stabilized immediately, and operations continued without incident. No one said anything. That was the way he preferred it. Small victories didn't need applause. Minutes later, the interference returned, this time stronger and spreading across multiple channels. Status updates were delayed, voices overlapped, and some units reported static. So severe it was almost impossible to follow. Panic didn't set in, but tension did. The Admiral's voice came over the comms, calm but sharp. Status report. All channels. One of the junior officers stammered. Multiple channels experiencing interference, ma'am. Some units losing position data. Backup not fully online. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Iron Ghost report. He didn't hesitate. Switching to fallback channel Delta 3. Manual relay protocol engaged. Confirm with 2-click acknowledgement from all units. Stand by. In the center of the comms room, he became the calm in the storm. Everyone else's voices jittered with uncertainty, but his remained steady, clear, and deliberate. He moved between screens, rerouting signals, stabilizing frequencies, and issuing short commands. Unit 7, confirmed 2-click. Confirmed. Unit 12, 2-click received. The network began to realign. Slowly at first, then steadily. The voices in the room became clear again. Coordination returned. Positions updated accurately. The interference, which had threatened to collapse the exercise, was now under control. The Admiral observed quietly, her sharp gaze following every movement. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She could see the flow of information being restored, the panic that had been held at bay. And she knew it was because of him. The rest of the team began to notice too. Iron Ghost, one of the techs muttered. He's holding it together. Everything's coming back online. Another nodded. I don't know how he's doing it. Channels were falling apart, and now, smooth. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. His focus was total. Every frequency, every relay, every unit was accounted for. As the exercise progressed, the simulated threat intensified. Drones reported hostile movement along the perimeter. Vessels had to adjust positions rapidly. Helicopters needed real-time guidance to avoid simulated collisions. Every message depended on secure communication. Without it, the operation could fail completely. His fingers moved automatically. He anticipated interference before it happened, rerouted signals before the teams even noticed a drop, and maintained a calm, clear voice that kept everyone on track. The Admiral, for the first time since the exercise began, allowed herself a slight nod. She had expected skill, yes, but not this level of composure under pressure. She had seen officers break under similar scenarios, lose focus, or make rash decisions. He did none of that. He acted with precision, calm, and an unshakable sense of responsibility. Hours passed, and the exercise reached its peak. A simulated hostile vessel moved unpredictably, forcing multiple units to shift simultaneously. A miscalculation by any operator could have caused a simulated collision or loss of position. The interference spike returned, stronger than before, threatening to overwhelm the fallback systems. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He activated a tertiary channel, a system he had designed for emergencies like this. He instructed units to confirm manually. Every unit responded in order. The channels aligned. The threat was neutralized, not because of luck, but because of methodical preparation and calm execution. Around him, the room was tense but functional. Around the base, operations were back on track. Across the network, a single voice had carried everyone through the storm. The call sign echoed silently in the minds of those who witnessed it. After the final scenario concluded, the exercise was officially over. The room exhaled collectively. Officers shared brief smiles. Hands released tense grips on consoles, and hum machinery returned to a steady rhythm. The Admiral stepped forward, approaching him directly for the first time that day. She didn't speak immediately. She watched him, observing how he had remained calm, how he had anticipated each failure before it could escalate, how he had carried the entire exercise through chaos without a single sign of stress. Finally, she said, "Iron Ghost." "Yes, ma'am." Her eyes met his directly. No mockery this time. Only acknowledgement. Only respect. "You just stabilized a network that should have collapsed. Do you realize what you just did?" He shrugged slightly, still standing at his console. "Just doing my job, ma'am." She studied him. She could see the experience in his eyes, the quiet confidence earned through years of trials no one else could imagine. She could see the patience it took to maintain that composure, the discipline to act precisely under pressure, and the quiet strength that had earned him that call sign long before she ever arrived. For a moment, there was silence, a pause where words weren't necessary. Then she turned to the rest of the team. "This is what calm under pressure looks like. This is why experience matters. Pay attention." The room settled, the lesson sinking in. Respect for him had grown silently, organically. Officers who had whispered about his call sign yesterday now looked at him with a mix of awe and recognition. Later, when the debriefing began, he stayed quiet. The focus wasn't on him. It never was. He let the evidence speak for itself. The restored network, the successful coordination, the flawless execution. Senior officers praised the team, but the unspoken understanding was clear. Iron Ghost had carried the day. After the debrief, a junior officer approached him, voice low and filled with admiration. "I don't think anyone knew it could be done like that. How did you stay so calm?" He smiled faintly. "Experience, focus, and a little habit." The officer blinked. "Habit?" He nodded. "When things go wrong, you prepare for what you can control, and you ignore what you can't. Everything else is noise." As he left the briefing room, he caught sight of the Admiral watching him again. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Recognition. Not praise, not mockery. Recognition. She had witnessed his skill firsthand. She had seen what the name Iron Ghost truly meant. Walking back to the station, he allowed himself a brief moment of thought about home, about his daughter, about the life he balanced alongside this one. The weight of responsibility never left him, but neither did the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done what mattered. The sun was high now, cutting across the base in sharp beams of light. The world outside seemed normal, calm, unaware of the chaos that had been avoided. But inside, he knew the truth. He had made a difference today, not for recognition, not for accolades, but because someone had to. That night, when he returned to his apartment, the city lights reflected on the water outside. His daughter greeted him with a hug and a smile. All the tension, all the adrenaline, all the chaos of the day melted in that simple gesture. He poured a cup of coffee, sat with her for a few minutes, and let the world outside wait. Tomorrow, the exercise would continue. Challenges would rise again. Channels might falter again. But he would remain steady. He would remain calm. He would remain Iron Ghost. And now, more than ever, he knew that the Admiral would understand what the name really meant. Not just a call sign, but a symbol of quiet strength, earned in the shadows, proven under pressure and respected by all who truly knew him. The day after the exercise, the base was quieter than usual. The morning air carried the sharp scent of salt and engines, but there was a calm that seemed to settle over the training grounds. The Admiral moved the corridors with her usual purposeful stride, but there was something different in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen yesterday. The calmness, the precision, the way the communications had never faltered under pressure. It had been unlike anything she had witnessed before. She walked past officers who were busy reviewing reports, paused at the windows overlooking the harbor, and finally decided she needed answers. Not questions she could ask casually, but the kind that required records, reports, and a deeper look into the man behind the call sign. She requested his personnel files. It was unusual, and her staff noticed the intensity in her tone. The files arrived within the hour, a stack of digital logs, mission summaries, and personal commendations. She began to read, her sharp eyes scanning quickly but carefully. The first thing that caught her attention was the list of missions marked classified. Each one had been sensitive, high risk, and often unpublicized. One particular mission from several years ago stood out. It was overseas, in a coastal region fraught with conflict. The description was brief, as most classified operations were, but the attached notes detailed the communications challenges, environmental hazards, and the critical role one officer had played. As she read, she realized the name Iron Ghost had not been given lightly. The officer had stabilized communications under fire, guided teams through dangerous terrain, and ensured the survival of every member of his unit. The notes described injuries he had sustained, both visible and hidden, and yet he had never asked for special recognition. She leaned back in her chair, letting the information sink in. This was the man who had kept the exercise from collapsing yesterday. The calm voice, the steady hands, the precise timing, it all made sense now. Her next discovery was personal, but just as telling. The files indicated that he had requested reduced deployment schedules, not out of fear or avoidance, but to care for a dependent. There were notes about his child, the arrangements he had made, and the sacrifices he had quietly accepted. She read a small note from a commanding officer praising his balance between duty and home, but it was just that, a small acknowledgement in a system that rarely gave full credit to personal sacrifices. She sat in silence for a long moment. Her usual decisiveness, her comfort with authority, even her unshakable confidence, all met with a quiet humility that she had rarely seen in a seasoned officer. The man had earned his call sign in ways most people could only imagine. The more she learned, the more she understood why he had never drawn attention to himself. Recognition was never his goal. Excellence and responsibility were. Later that afternoon, she decided to visit the communications center. She wanted to see him in action again, to understand the rhythm, the thought process, and the quiet confidence she had glimpsed yesterday. She entered without announcement, moving past consoles and officers who quickly straightened and adjusted their posture. She stopped behind him, observing the screens, the data, and the way his eyes moved with calm precision. He didn't notice her at first, focused entirely on the adjustments he was making. Channels were stable, but a small fluctuation appeared on one feed. Without hesitation, he rerouted, confirmed acknowledgement from units, and stabilized it. She watched, impressed. There was no hesitation, no drama, no need for show. Just steady hands, clear commands, and perfect timing. Finally, he looked up and noticed her. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said simply. She studied him carefully. "I've been reviewing your records," she said. Her voice was even, but there was no mistaking the weight behind her words. "I think I finally understand what Iron Ghost really means." He inclined his head, slightly, still calm. "It's just a call sign, ma'am." She smiled faintly, but there was a seriousness behind it. "It's more than that. I see now that it represents years of discipline, quiet courage, and responsibility. It's earned, not chosen." For the first time, there was a pause between them that carried meaning. He was used to recognition being unnecessary, used to action speaking louder than words. Yet here was someone who understood, who had seen the results of his steady hand and clear voice. She gestured toward the consoles. Tell me about the mission overseas, the one where the team lost comms under fire. The report is brief, but I want to understand what really happened. He nodded slowly and began recounting the events. He spoke without exaggeration, without dramatizing, just stating facts as they had occurred. He described the terrain, the enemy patrols, the sudden failure of satellite links, and the way he manually rerouted communications under extreme pressure. He mentioned injuries, the strain, the tension, but never once emphasized himself. The Admiral listened intently. She asked questions, clarifying technical details, understanding the risks, and realizing how high the stakes had been. She could see how every decision, every adjustment, every comm instruction had made the difference between success and failure. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I understand now, she said. Not just a mission, but the choices you made afterward, balancing duty with responsibility at home, ensure your child had stability while still excelling at your work. That takes more courage than most people will ever know. He offered a faint smile. It's just what had to be done, ma'am. I didn't do it for praise. She nodded. I know, but it matters. It matters because it kept people alive. And it matters because it shows the kind of person you are. She paused and looked at him with a level of respect that few had shown. You've earned more than a call sign. You've earned trust and admiration. Not because you asked for it, but because you've proven it in ways most officers never experience. He didn't respond immediately. Recognition had never been his goal. But there was something grounding in her words, a validation that didn't feel like a reward but a quiet acknowledgement of truth. She continued. From now on, when I hear that call sign, I won't think of it as a joke. I'll think of the calm, steady, decisive action that carries a team through impossible situations. And I'll make sure others understand it too. For the first time, he felt the weight of acknowledgement without expectation. There was no need to justify himself, no need to defend his past actions. She understood the truth of what he had done, the quiet sacrifices, the steady courage. Later that evening, she requested a meeting with the other officers who had observed the exercise. She recounted what had happened, detailing how the communications had faltered and how they had been stabilized. She highlighted the precision, the foresight, and the calm execution of the man known as Iron Ghost. The officers listened, some in surprise, others in quiet admiration. The room had been filled with whispers about the call sign yesterday. Now, those whispers were replaced with acknowledgement. They understood that excellence could be quiet, that courage could be measured not in loud acts, but in calm precision under pressure. Meanwhile, he returned to his apartment, the city lights reflecting off the water outside. His daughter was waiting for him. As usual, her small presence a reminder of what he balanced every day. He helped her with her homework, shared a simple dinner, and tucked her in for the night. Outside, the world could remain unaware of the high-stakes operations and near failures. Inside, he had completed his most important mission, being steady, present, and reliable. As he sat back at the kitchen table, he allowed himself a moment to reflect on the day. The Admiral had seen what he could do. She understood, finally, the full story behind Iron Ghost. She would respect him not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. That respect mattered more than medals or recognition. It was deeper, lasting, and sincere. He knew that future exercises would continue to test the team. Communication channels would fail again. Unexpected events would arise. But now, there was mutual understanding. He would continue to perform his role with calm precision, and the Admiral would see his actions for what they truly were. A steady hand in chaos, a reliable voice when the noise threatened to overwhelm, and a man who carried both responsibility and humanity with quiet strength. And for the first time, he allowed himself to feel a small sense of relief. Not pride, not triumph, just the acknowledgement that someone finally saw the truth. He switched off the lights and looked out at the harbor. The ships were still, the water calm, but he knew the waves could rise again at any moment. He didn't fear them. He had faced storms before, both literal and figurative. He had learned that calm, steady action carried farther than any recognition or praise. It was the kind of courage that mattered when lives depended on it. As he prepared for the next day, he thought again of his daughter, of the balance he maintained between duty and family. He thought of the Admiral and of the quiet understanding they had reached. In the world of high-stakes operations, acknowledgement was rare, trust was earned, respect was earned, and he had finally received both, not through words or medals, but through the simple, undeniable truth of steady action under pressure. He went to bed that night with a sense of calm. The world outside was vast, unpredictable, and full of challenges. But he had proven, once again, that he could navigate it with skill, discipline, and humanity. The call sign Iron Ghost was no longer just a name. It was a symbol of quiet courage, steadfast determination, and a life lived with purpose, both on duty and at home. The next mission came suddenly. A severe storm had damaged a small coastal town near the base's area of responsibility. Floodwaters had cut off power. Communications were intermittent, and several vessels were stranded near the harbor. It wasn't part of the scheduled exercise. This was real, and time was critical. The Admiral called the team together immediately. The room hummed with urgency. Officers and support staff moved quickly, reviewing maps, checking vessels, and preparing equipment. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling windows and sending papers flying across desks. He arrived at the communications center before most of the team. His headset rested comfortably around his neck, his eyes scanning every screen for anomalies. Channels had already begun fluctuating due to the storm, and initial reports indicated several units had lost GPS updates. The Admiral stepped in behind him. She no longer needed introductions or explanations. She had seen what he could do. The respect was clear in her posture, the way she didn't question, the way she trusted his decisions. The mission began with urgency. Multiple vessels had to be guided through flooded areas, avoiding submerged debris and high waves. Helicopters had to maintain air cover and perform reconnaissance. Drones were launched for visual tracking, feeding data back into the network. Every element depended on the stability of the communication system. Within minutes, interference began to spike across multiple channels. Lines that had been clear moments before were now full of static. Some vessels reported losing connection entirely. Orders overlapped and confusion spread. The Admiral called out calmly, but with authority, "Status report. Where are gaps?" He did not hesitate. Fallback Delta 3 engaged. Manual relay initiated. Confirmed two-click acknowledgement from all units. Stand by. Hands moved quickly across consoles. His voice carried the instructions with clarity and calmness, cutting through the static. One by one, units responded. The signals began to stabilize. Coordination returned. Outside, the wind howled, and rain pelted against the windows. Waves slapped against vessels in the harbor. The situation was dangerous, real, and unpredictable. Yet inside the comms room, there was a rhythm, a controlled focus, anchored by a steady voice. Vessels maneuvered through flooded streets and broken piers. Helicopters hovered above, dodging sudden gusts of wind. Units on the ground relayed updates back through the channels he managed, all following the path he had stabilized. The storm worsened and the risk of failure grew. One vessel reported a disabled engine and drifting toward a submerged structure. Panic could have spread quickly. He did not panic. He directed a secondary vessel to intercept, relaying precise coordinates and timing adjustments. The other ship adjusted its speed and heading perfectly. Collision avoided. Lives preserved. The Admiral watched from the edge of the room, her eyes narrowing with focus. She had seen simulations, drills, and past operations. Nothing she had witnessed compared to this. The way he handled the chaos, remaining calm and deliberate, keeping multiple units coordinated while the storm raged outside, was extraordinary. Hours passed, and the team worked tirelessly. Some officers began to tire, but his presence had a stabilizing effect. Every command was clear. Every reroute of communication was precise. Every critical decision was made before problems could escalate. At one point, a young officer turned to him in disbelief. "How are you keeping all of this in your head? The storm, the channels, the vessels, I can barely keep up." He smiled faintly, still scanning screens. "Focus on what you can control. Don't get distracted by what you can't. Step by step. One channel, one vessel, one update at a time." The officer nodded, absorbing the lesson. Slowly, the room's tension eased as coordination returned fully under his guidance. The storm was relentless, but the network held. The mission could continue safely. Finally, the last vessel reached a secure point near the harbor. All units confirmed safe. Helicopters returned to base. Drones landed, and communications cleared entirely. The storm was still outside, but the immediate danger had passed. The room exhaled collectively. Officers exchanged tired smiles. Relief replaced tension. And in the center of it all, he remained calm, checking each channel one last time before setting the headset down. The Admiral stepped forward, closer this time. There was no formality in her voice, only acknowledgement. You just saved lives today. Every decision, every instruction, it mattered. I've seen many officers in my career, but what you did, you kept people alive under conditions they couldn't manage without you. He looked up at her, expression neutral. I was just doing my job, ma'am. She shook her head slightly. No, this was beyond a job. This was steady action under real pressure. This was skill, focus, and courage. And it wasn't just your skill with the equipment. It was the way you carried responsibility, knowing what mattered most. That's leadership. Her words were heavy with respect, unlike before, when she had seen him in exercises. Today she had witnessed him act when failure could have meant disaster, and he had handled it with complete composure. Later, as the storm faded and the sun began to rise over the horizon, he returned home. The city streets were wet and glistening, debris scattered from the night's fury. He walked past flooded areas, keeping an eye out for signs of danger, though most of the immediate threat had passed. His daughter ran to greet him, holding a small stuffed animal tightly in her hands. She didn't understand the full extent of what had happened at the base. She only knew her father had returned safely. He knelt down, hugging her, letting her feel the steadiness that had guided him through chaos. Inside, he made her breakfast and listened as she recounted her small adventures from the day. He laughed quietly, helping her with homework and cleaning up after dinner. Outside, the sun reflected on puddles, painting the streets gold and orange. Inside, he maintained a calm world, a safe space, a steady presence. That evening, the Admiral sent a brief message to the team acknowledging the mission. She singled out his role without fanfare, recognizing his calm precision and decisive action. The officers who had witnessed the event felt a new level of respect. They understood what the call sign Iron Ghost truly meant. A man whose steady hand and clear voice carried everyone through the chaos, whether in simulation or real danger. He read the message quietly, not seeking recognition. The knowledge that he had done his job, that he had protected lives, that he had maintained balance between work and home, was enough. Recognition had never been his goal. The world outside could celebrate or ignore him. It didn't matter. Later, as night fell, he reflected on the day. He had acted under pressure, when failure could have meant disaster. He had guided teams through storms, both literal and metaphorical, while maintaining calm and precision. The Admiral, now fully aware of his skill and character, would respect him as a professional and as a person who carried responsibility with quiet strength. He glanced at the small notebook he kept by the kitchen table. Notes, backup plans, contingencies, all carefully organized and maintained over years. Every detail mattered. Every precaution counted. Tonight, it had all made a difference. As he prepared for bed, he thought of the lessons from the day. Focus, steady action, calm communication, and the importance of responsibility. He thought of his daughter, waiting for him at home every day, and how that quiet motivation had guided many of his decisions. He thought of the Admiral, now a witness to what Iron Ghost truly meant. The call sign was no longer just a name. It was a symbol of trust, of skill, and of quiet courage under pressure. It represented a man who balanced duty with humanity, who acted with precision when the stakes were high, and who carried responsibility with a calm determination that few could match. He switched off the lights, letting the soft hum of the city settle around him. The storm had passed. The channels were clear. Lives had been protected. And in the quiet, he allowed himself a small sense of satisfaction. Not pride, not triumph, just a calm acknowledgement of work done well and responsibility fulfilled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new storms, and new missions. but he would remain steady, focused, and unshaken. He would remain Iron Ghost. And for the first time, in the full circle of duty, skill, and humanity, he knew that the Admiral would respect the name as much as those who had once witnessed it whispered in awe. Quiet courage, steady action, and responsibility had carried the day. And in that truth, he found peace.